Please welcome Rossina Zamora Liu, Assistant Professor of Urban Education.
If you're interested in learning about the consequences of systemic racism, would you read studies by researchers who benefit directly from systemic racism? I know I probably wouldn't, but in the instances that I would, and have, and sometimes do, it is because the researchers are clear about why they are the ones to tell the story, and therefore why I should read their work. For researchers studying systemic racism, establishing our reliability and trustworthiness relies on our ability to also understand who we are in relation to systemic racism. And importantly, it depends on whether we understand what is at stake for us in rupturing the very racist system within which some of us may benefit and or are privileged. It's important that we understand how our racialized identities and experiences inform what we know or don't know, what we bring or don't bring to this work. As a Southeast Asian American woman and as a faculty of color at a historically white institution, for example, I experience systemic racism differently than my colleagues who are racialized as Black, Indigenous, Latina, and or other persons of color. When I talk about systemic racism, I'm talking about it from a place of knowingness that's deeply rooted in scholarship, yes, and also from a place that's deeply rooted in my own lived experiences as a racialized person, as someone who came to the United States as a child refugee, someone who spoke multiple languages but mocked for my accented English. You'll also know, if you read my work, that I'm someone who supports federal-funded meal programs, because free and reduced school lunches meant that I would eat at least once a day. You'll also know that I'm someone who supports race-conscious educational policies, because that would mean that institutions recognize racial disparities, and that someone like me could and would and have excelled despite my test scores. For researchers of color, our experiences of racism have taught us how to navigate white spaces. It's taught us to survive, to thrive in some cases, to live and to exist in spite of it. And because of that, knowing how we and our communities have persisted within a racist ecology that was not meant for our survival, we also come to understand just how profound that is. We understand why it's important that we insist on authoring our story, that we create space for our expertise, that we grant ourselves the right to center our healing and well-being, as well as those of our collective communities of color. This is what I teach in my research methods classes and in how I direct my research on systemic racism. I begin with an invitation. I say, why are you the person to tell this story? Who are you in community with? How will you work to reduce racial harm against communities of color? How will your work move us toward a better world, a better us? I then say, reflect, write, heal. I say, let your stories take any shape it wants to be in. I say, create, dream, fly. As self-publications, zines, are perfect for this kind of storytelling and this kind of reflection because they invite us to compose freely and without any concerns for predetermined structures and therefore predetermined stories. In my class, we use found materials. We use old letters, we use old photos, cardboard boxes, and then we sit together and we reflect. We write and we heal. We heal through telling stories that cohere with our ancestors, that reflect our gendered racial identities, that reflect our connections to land, desires for home, racial healing, and making of new worlds and futures. What were once old magazines or old planners or the sides of delivery boxes, they're repurposed. They reemerge as magazine collages, as origamis, as graphic novels. They reemerge as zines. Of course, the physical representations of our stories through these zines rarely, if ever, make it into journal articles, nor into our classroom for that matter, but the stories that are unveiled from making them do. In our research, we reference the works of bell hooks, who reminds us that our stories breathe life into us, and because they do, we must tell them over and over again until there is no forgetting. Of course, bell hooks is talking about sustaining Black life and Black living, but we can appreciate the implications of her teachings. We can appreciate the importance of stories in our lives and how we each have our own origins and thus our own roots and rootedness, that of which ground us in why we should be the ones telling our stories. Indeed, our stories are multi-layered, painful at times, restorative at other times, and always connected to something, to somewhere, to someone. My name is Rossina Zamora Liu. I am my history, my community, my family. My work is my story, and that is why I am the person to tell it. Thank you, and thank you to the zine makers and storytellers.